Welcome everybody to Estonian Unlocked, where we help you learn the Estonian language. Today we're going to dive into the Estonian alphabet, so let's get started. So here is the Estonian alphabet. As you can see, most of these letters are going to look pretty familiar to you. We've got some letters that look kind of scary here, and so don't be worried about those. We're going to get into those. But looking through it, for the most part, things look pretty familiar and things are going to sound pretty familiar. We're going to start first by talking about vowels. Now, in English, oftentimes vowels make multiple sounds. So A, for example, can make the sound but in Estonian, it's only going to make one sound, and all of these vowels are only going to make one sound. So let's go through and practice each of these sounds. I'll say the sound, and then I'll pause for a second for you to practice out loud. So here we go. The first one is ah. Ah. This next sound is eh. The next sound is e. This next letter is o. And the next one is oo. So going through that top line again, we have a, e, o, oo. So all of those are sounds that we're pretty comfortable with and pretty familiar with. Just keep in mind that all of these letters, again, are only going to make one sound. So this next line has some letters that look pretty scary, but as we get going, you'll realize that they're really not as bad as you might think. This first letter is a. A. And that's just like apple, right? A as in apple. This next letter is There's a couple of ways to think about this if you're trying to remember. It's the same sound as foot. Foot. Another way that I've heard people talk about it is this squiggly line on the top. You can kind of think of it as like a little hand that's punching you in the gut. And so if you get punched in the gut, you're like, ugh, ugh. And that's a similar sound to what we're going for here. Foot, that sound. So these first two vowels are pretty easy, a and Now we're going to move on to these next two vowels. And these vowels, again, they look pretty scary. And I'm sorry to break it to you, but they are kind of scary. But as you practice and as you use these tools I'm going to show you, you'll get much better at it. So this first sound is U. Go ahead and practice that a couple of times. U, U, U. And this next sound is Now, if you're having a hard time with these, guess what? That is totally normal. It's going to take some practice. It's going to take a little bit of time. But let's talk about some tools that you can use to pronounce these vowels a little bit easier. Any vowel that we pronounce is going to be composed of two elements physically. The first is what your lips are doing, and the second is what your tongue is doing. So let's break these letters down into what our lips are doing and what our tongue is doing. First, for U, our lips are saying oo. So that's that letter, oo. Our tongue is saying e. So that's this letter here, e. Now, practice a couple of times saying these two letters and think about what your lips and tongue are doing when you say them. So when we say E, think about where your tongue is. E, 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 E. Now, when we say oo, think about where your lips go. Ooh, ooh, ooh. U is just a mix between the two of those. So the way that I want you to practice this is start by just saying E, 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 and then pause while you're saying it and don't move your mouth. E. Now, without moving your tongue, pull your lips over and form this ooh shape. Now, with your mouth in that position, try to copy what I'm saying. Ooh, ooh, U. Again, say E. Pull your lips around. E. U. 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 And that's going to be what's going to get you to this perfect U sound. U. Now, it's going to take some practice. It's going to take some time to listen to native Estonian speakers and try to copy them. But if you pay attention to where your lips and where your tongue are, you're going to be able to get the sound much better. Okay, our next letter that we want to talk about is And again, this is just a mix between what we're doing with our lips and what we're doing with our tongue. Now, with our lips, we're going to say O. Same letter as that, O. With our tongue, we're going to say eh. And so let's do the same thing. We're going to practice here. We're going to start with eh. Now, without moving your tongue, pull your lips around to an O. Pull your lips around. And that's how we make the sound. It's a mix between what our tongue is doing and what our lips are doing. Okay, before we move on from these letters, there are a couple of cautions that I want to tell you about that I don't want you to get stuck in. And these are common mistakes that English speakers make just as they're trying to remember these letters and learn what they mean. And they kind of get stuck in these false beliefs about these letters. So let's start with U. I've heard lots of English speakers say that U is just a mix between E and U. And that's right. If you remember what our lips are doing and what our tongue are doing, that it's a mix from those. But what it's not is these two letters in a row. It's not EU or ew. We're not saying ew, we're saying U. It's a merge of these letters. So it's not E plus U, it's U, U. And that's what I want you to really get in your head, because where this really runs into problems with people is that then instead of saying U, they say two letters. And remember, all Estonian vowels always make just one sound, not two sounds. And so when they separate this as E and U, they're saying different words. So for example, we have küsima, which is to ask. Like if I want to ask someone a question. And we have kiusama, which is to tempt. So if you're learning Estonian and you're speaking with someone and they realize that you're a beginner speaker and you're saying kiusima, or some conjugate form of kiusima, they might think that you're talking about tempt and they'll be confused because it's not EU, it's kiusima, instead of kiusama or kiusima as some people try to pronounce it. And so just kind of be aware that U makes one sound. It's not two sounds sequentially. It's those two sounds mixed together. And I like to think, as I pronounce it, that U is about 40% U and 60% E. And just in my mind, that's kind of how the E kind of bleeds through a little bit more than the U sound. And as you listen to native speakers, you'll get a better idea for that. But definitely do not say E, U sequentially. Just do them together as one sound. Okay, let's move on now to Now, the problem that I often hear English speakers say with is they'll try to remember, oh, that's just the O, that's an R. And if you pronounce your R like it's a British R, then you're pretty much on the right track with It kind of sounds like a British R. And while I do think that that's fairly true, kind of sounds like a British R. Problem becomes people start seeing and they think R, but R in Estonian is flipped. And then since they just think is R, they start flipping their And this causes lots of confusion when you're trying to speak to native Estonian speakers, especially if the context is wrong and they don't really know what you're talking about anyways. So let me give an example. If I'm saying söön, or I eat, or I will 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 eat, or and I flip my then I kind of say sörn, and it almost sounds like surm or suren, which is I will die, or death. Surm, sörn, sörn. And people just kind of get really confused. And so if you're equating in your head with a kind of British pronunciation of R, just make sure that you don't end up flipping your ers, because then you're going to run into all kinds of problems and people aren't going to understand you. So coming back now, we have our vowels. We have A, E, O, U, and those ones are all pretty easy and pretty normal. And then we have our scary looking ones, which are A, U, and Now, with some practice, you can get all of these. Go through the drills that I taught you, listen to native speakers, and you'll really be on the right track. So that's vowels. Let's move on to consonants. Consonants in Estonian are very similar to how they are in English. And as we work through these, I want you to think about them in the framework of voiced versus unvoiced consonants. As we work through this list, you'll see that on the left side are all of these letters that are voiced consonants, and on the right side are all the letters that are unvoiced consonants. But as we say these letters, our mouth does pretty much the same thing. Let me show you what I mean. When we say B in English, as in boy, it is voiced, boy. When we say P in English, it is unvoiced, as in put. P is unvoiced. In Estonian, it's the same thing. If we say baby in Estonian for baby, baby, the B is voiced. If we say paika in Estonian for sun, paika, P is unvoiced, paika. We go straight to the I, paika. But either way, when we say them, our mouth does the same thing. Baby, paika, b. Our mouth does the same thing. So give it a try. Bounce between b and p, and just pronounce those letters and pay attention to what your mouth is doing and see that your mouth is really doing the same thing. The difference here is whether or not you're using your voice or you're not using your voice. Now, the same thing is going to be true for all of the letters on this list. D and T have that same difference. D, t, d, t. Same with G and K, V and F, Z and S, Z, S. And we'll talk about this bottom one in a second. So you can kind of see that really we don't have a lot of sounds to master. We just have to recognize that some are voiced and some are unvoiced. I promise I did not forget about these ones at the bottom here. Let's start with this one on the right. This is just shh. So if you're in the library and you're shushing someone, shh has the exact same sound. This other one, pause for a second and think, what does shh sound like if I voice it? And a word in English that I use to describe this is azure, which is a color. It's like the color of the sky. And so azure is a pretty good English word that kind of demonstrates this sound. So that's consonants. We have voiced consonants and unvoiced consonants, but our mouth does pretty much the same thing when we pronounce them. Let's talk for a second about some miscellaneous letters and pronunciations in Estonian. The first one is W. In Estonian, W is almost always going to be pronounced as V. That's because W is a foreign letter. It's a borrowed letter. X in Estonian doesn't really exist because it's just a combination of K and S. J in Estonian is pronounced the way we pronounce Y in English, just a Y. R's in Estonian are flipped. And we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to emphasize they are not rolled the way they are in Spanish. They're not, they are flipped. So if we say the word, for example, arvan, I think, or I have like this opinion, it's flipped. It's not arvan. That's rolled. You're going to kind of sound like a weirdo if you say arvan, but it's just flipped. Ma arvan, I think. Finally, we have the borrowed letters in Estonian. We've touched on these a little bit, but this list here are letters that are not inherently from the Estonian language, but have been incorporated into the Estonian language from borrowed words from other languages, or only appear in names. So that's it. That's the Estonian alphabet. We've gone over vowels, we've gone over some consonants, and we've gone over some foreign letters. As you look over this list now, hopefully you feel a lot more comfortable with what you see. If you see some things that you think, hey, wait, we didn't talk about those, just assume for now that the Estonian pronunciation is almost the same as the English pronunciation and go with what you know. As you continue practicing the tools that I've given you today and mimicking and listening to native speakers, you'll find that your ability to pronounce these letters in Estonian will come much more naturally and will sound a lot more authentic. That's it for today's lesson on the Estonian alphabet. With these basics down, you'll be well on your way to mastering the Estonian language. Keep practicing and stay tuned for more lessons on Estonian Unlocked. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more language learning tips and tricks. Aitäh, and thank you for watching.